to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Teachers, mark your calendars for Bet UK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, Bet has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to my first show. I am Danny Wally. This is the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening. I hope you've got something to say and will join in the conversation with me tonight. Please drop me a text or even call in and talk to me. Tonight's topic, we are talking all things leadership. And my question to everybody is, what advice would you give to someone starting out their first middle leadership role? What do you wish that you knew? So I thought we'd start the conversation tonight with an idea here about leadership in education. Now, for me, it strikes me as really interesting that public sector roles, particularly teaching, is a situation where you can become a middle leader in a school with no explicit training before on leadership at all. You know, actually, it's often the really great teachers who make it into roles as head of department. And in my experience, just because they're a great teacher doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a great leader. While I was preparing for this, I was reflecting on my own experiences as a middle leader, and I look back to 10 years ago, and I think, you know, I had all the ambition and the enthusiasm in the world, but I had no training and I had no idea what leadership actually really was. And I managed to earn myself the nickname of a bull in a china shop, and, you know, for 10 years, I haven't really been able to shake that. So please talk to me, text in, call in, share some of your experiences with me about your roles and responsibility in leadership and almost those lessons that you learned the hard way. So if we take that really famous quote that we don't actually know who said it, but that idea of middle leaders are the engine room of any school, and we accept that the best senior leaders in the world can have the best strategic vision in the world, but without a strong middle leadership to implement and to run their ideas, it's pretty useless. How can we as schools make sure that our middle leaders are strong and experienced and have got the skill set that they need to be effective? So I was thinking about, you know, what would my 5 top tips be to somebody who's just starting out in education? What advice would I give them? So as I go through mine, I'll say it again, please talk to me. If you're joining me live, you can talk to me on the Podbean app. And if you're listening to me later, then please talk to me on social media. Okay, so my top tip number 1, I'll share mine. So you don't have to know it all. And actually, that one for me is really, really interesting, and always what I think really interesting when I share it with aspiring middle leaders, because I think everybody, and it's a compliment, isn't it, really? Everybody looks at middle leadership within education and thinks that they know everything. But just because you're a head of department doesn't mean that you need to be or know everything there is to know about teaching and learning or curriculum within that particular area. You know, actually, one of the things that I think is the most endearing quality, or often one of the most effective qualities of a leader, is vulnerability, and actually showing that you don't know it all, but that you want to learn, and that you want to learn together with your team. And vulnerability, as we know, can be an amazing way to build relationships and that culture of honesty. Now, I don't want to sound preachy here. I'm certainly not preaching, and I certainly don't think that I am some sort of guru when it comes to leadership. But it's that idea of you've got to take your team with you. And actually, if you can admit mistakes, and if you can admit when you're wrong, and if you can share that idea that you don't know it all, then your team can do that as well. You know, your team will be more open to sharing ideas with you because they know that you're not going to reprimand them if it's wrong or if they're on the wrong track. You know, Amy Edmondson talks about it, doesn't she, with psychological safety, and that idea of, you know, people won't contribute or share ideas with you unless you create that situation or that environment where people feel comfortable to do that. I'm a big advocate for leadership education, as you've probably gathered already, but also this idea of upscaling and actually engaging with literature, you know, not necessarily from leaders within education, but just about leadership. And one of the most influential papers that I ever looked at, and then later his book, was Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this idea of you can't have accountability until you've got trust. And you can't build trust without giving trust. And that very much to me ties in with this idea of vulnerability, because actually to give somebody trust, you have to be vulnerable, because you have to accept that they're not going to do it the way you want. And you have to accept that they might fail with what you've asked them to do. But it's all part of being able to build that team and that culture. Okay, I have got my first texter. How exciting. Okay, so somebody's put, it's really hard when teachers are rigid and can be really reluctant to change. What do you suggest? Yeah, it's an absolutely brilliant comment, and I totally agree. And I think actually when you approach leadership, it's one of the scariest things, isn't it? That you want things to change, and you've got your vision of how you want things to be. And often people have been there for years and they like the way things are and they don't want to change. And actually, again, I don't profess to know it all, but I think my advice in that situation would be don't change it all. I asked my principal, who I think is listening, so this could be really fun. I asked my principal ahead of this radio show, I said, look, I'm going to do a chat about leadership in education and almost try and provide tips to people about what do they wish that they'd known. And I said, you know, my boss is a brilliant leader. And I said, what advice would you give? And actually, she said to me, it's the 100-day rule. Now, I'd never heard of this, but she said for the first 100 days in any role, it's about listening. It's not about changing. It's not about driving a vision. It's about listening, gathering evidence, getting to know everybody, understanding their roles and responsibility. And after those 100 days, that's when you can start your plan, your short-term, medium-term and long-term plan. And you can start putting that together. I thought it was great advice because, again, I reflect back on my journey in middle leadership, and I think I was so desperate to prove myself. You know, I wanted everybody to know that I deserved this opportunity and I knew what I was doing and I had this plan and everything was going to change for the better. And actually, I kind of look back a little bit and think that was my downfall. You know, that kind of want to impress everyone actually meant that I just kind of isolated myself and came across as someone who wasn't down to earth and didn't understand the many balls that everybody is constantly juggling in teaching, because teaching is hard and leadership is hard. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for texting in and for talking to me, because it is hard when nobody wants to change. But I think that is leadership, isn't it? Is having to create a culture where people want to change with you, and you know, you're not enforcing change and you're not making people do things. It's about leading people to follow you and come with you. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Please keep texting in, otherwise this is going to be a really long hour. So please talk to me and let me know. If you've just joined me, welcome. I am Danny Wally and this is the Late Late Show, and we are talking all things leadership tonight. And my question to you guys as listeners is, what advice would you give someone starting out in their first middle leadership role? Now, I have shared my first top tip, which is you don't have to know it all. And actually, there's a real strength there in vulnerability. I've got another comment, so thank you so much for texting, about talk to us about the why. And yeah, I totally agree. And, it's Simon Sinek, that, isn't it? It's that idea of, it's not just what are you going to do or how are you going to do it? It's why are you doing it? Sell the vision. What are you about? Who are you as a leader? What do you stand for? And yeah, I totally agree. So thank you so much, Kelly, for that comment. I think it's that idea, isn't it, that to get people to come with you, they've got to know who you are. And again, that links really to my second top tip, which is listen. And again, that I look back at one of my roles in middle leadership. I'm talking like I'm ancient. I'm not ancient, by the way. I did middle leadership roles for about 7 years, and I'm now in senior leadership. But I do look back at the different roles within middle leadership that I did. And one of the things that I think was particularly effective, and we're talking about advice that we would give to other people, when I joined a new team, the first thing I did actually was ask questions. And I individually met with everybody and I said, I want to get to know you. You don't know me, I don't know you. But in advance of the meeting, I want you to prepare an answer to these 3 questions. And I said, okay, question number 1. What do I need to keep the same? What's working? What do you like? What do I need to not touch and just totally leave alone? Question 2, what do I need to change? And then question 3 was that personal question. And it was what are your aspirations? What do you want to do within your career, and how can I help you get there? And I asked my team to prepare the answers, to these 3 questions for their meetings. And I went through them. And again, it's that idea of listening to them, listening to understand who they are as people and to build those bonds as a team. Because that, again, that's what leadership is, isn't it? It's leading people. So yeah, that's a really good piece of advice that I would give. I'm going to go on to the text now because I really appreciate it. People are texting in. This is amazing. Thank you so much. So we've got some thoughts on here. So we'll go back to the question. So what advice would you give to someone starting out in their first middle leadership role? Natty says, how would you advise someone who is struggling to engage middle leaders who are APOKC, who are okay? I think your question there, Natty, is how would you advise someone who's struggling to engage other middle leaders? And I think actually I would say that there's a real strength there and a real opportunity to engage with other middle leaders to share good practice. And again, to ask questions, which again links. So Joanne has commented on the text and put, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's not a weakness. And I totally agree with that. Again, it really links to what we were saying before about vulnerability and showing that you don't know it all, that you don't think that you know it all, that you want to listen, that you want to learn, and asking help, particularly if you're in a new school. Obviously we're starting the new school year. It's October. I've got lots of new colleagues working at the moment, and I'm trying to check in and say, how is it going? And the answer they give me is always really similar. It's overwhelming. And it absolutely is. When you start a new school, you've got to learn the behaviour policies. You've got to learn the registers, the what day the meetings are and where everybody's rooms are and what everybody's name is, let alone the pupils. You've got to learn the staff, the cleaners, the office staff. It's a nightmare. And I think if you're adding on top of that as well, that idea of starting in a new school as a leader where you want people to think positively about you, to me, the most common mistake in that situation is going to be going back to what we said before about pretending that you know everything and not having that vulnerability and that openness to say, actually, could you just help me with this? Because I don't know how to log this behaviour point, or I don't know what the school's policy about this is, and having that openness. So yeah, I really appreciate that, Joanne. Thank you so much, because I totally agree. Okay, keep texting me. Again, if you're listening on the Podbean app, then please join in the chat and let me know, what advice would we give to middle leaders starting out in education? My top tip number 3 is lead by example. And it sounds really obvious, this, almost cliche. I was writing this thinking, is that too cliche? But it is what I mean, because actually I was thinking about this. You've been to interview, you've pitched yourself, you've pitched your vision, you've, used all the technical vocabulary to show how knowledgeable you are, but now you've got to pitch yourself to your team. And this really made me think, you've got to have a clear vision for what you want to do. And this links really to what Kelly was saying on the chat before about knowing the why and sharing the why with your team. Why do you want to change? Why do you want to lead this team? Who are you and what do you stand for? And again, I look back at visions, and I think sometimes visions can be really wordy paragraphs where people are trying to make it sound good. It's not about sounding good. It's about being transparent. I suppose it was probably more of a mantra than a vision, but I look back when I was leading faculty, I was leading humanities, and I just kept saying to everybody, positive, proactive, because that's what I wanted from them, and we talked before about my boss's golden nugget of advice, that idea of the 100 days listening. And again, Leanne's commented, thank you, Leanne, for texting in, and look and watch before you change things, but you have got to be transparent about who you are, what you'll do, what you stand for within your role, what can your staff expect from you, but also what do you want from them? And I think, I'm not talking an onerous list where you're saying, right, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, but I do think there's a real strength actually in saying, I want you to use the behaviour policy. I want to see you being positive on the corridors. You might not be on duty that day, but I want to see that you've opened that door and you've stepped out and you're supporting the ethos of the school. I want you to be positive. I don't want you engaging in conversations about policies and things like that. Share your thoughts with me. Let's not share them with other people. Whatever it might be, whatever it is that you stand for, I think there's a real strength personally in being really forthcoming about that. And actually, almost thinking, what would you stick on your door? What would your door say about you? What is it that you stand for as a leader? And like I said, positive and proactive, that was mine, because my vision at the time was, if everybody can be positive about what we're doing, if everybody can take that proactivity, then we're on to a winner. You can build on that from there with your short-term, medium-term and long-term plans. And I think as well, one of the other bits of advice under this very large umbrella of lead by example is, I was really honest with people about how to communicate with me. And I think this is something that I've really explored recently in my career, this idea of how do people communicate with me best? So, for example, it's my first show tonight. I don't know if I've mentioned that. Thank you very much for listening to me. As a person, I think I am really energetic, really upfront and really honest, sometimes to my detriment. I accept that, but I'm just come and tell me how it is type of person. And I remember standing in front of my team and saying, whatever it is, just come and tell me. If you think I'm getting it wrong, come and tell me. Don't tell each other. That's not helpful. Come and tell me. Come and talk to me. If you think I've done something wrong, if I haven't done what I've said I'm going to do, I've told you I'm going to be out on that corridor, pounding those corridors, making sure that the children are on time to your lesson and they're following that behaviour policy. And if actually you've noticed that I'm not doing that and I'm sat in a staff room having my coffee, I want you to come and talk to me. I want you to come and tell me. I want you to say, Danny, you're getting this wrong. Because if your team can't tell you, then no one can tell you. And actually, as a leader, if you can't listen to feedback, then you're never going to get better. And that's not just something that you should want for yourself. It's something that you should want for your team. And I suppose it links to Kim Scott and Radical Candor, that idea of, it's not about holding people to account. I think, again, we're talking a lot tonight, aren't we, about reflecting on mistakes middle leaders often make. And I think I'll share my little story. So I remember my first job in middle leadership, and I was so scared about those difficult conversations. Text in and talk to me. I'm sure you were the same. That first difficult conversation was anxiety inducing. And I remember Googling and being like, right, how do I have a difficult conversation? And I got all these different structures up, and I was like, right, okay, so I've got to do this and then I've got to do that. And surprise, surprise, I went in with this head of department to have this difficult conversation about something, and it did not go well. And I look back now and think, yeah, obviously it didn't. And it's Lencioni, we mentioned it earlier. You can't have accountability without trust. And you can't have trust if you haven't given honest feedback to that person and listened and received honest feedback yourself. And, Kim Scott says in Radical Candor, it isn't difficult conversations. It's open and honest feedback all the time, talking about the little things rather than letting them build up. Care personally, challenge directly, go to that person and just really quietly say, Sarah, I noticed that you weren't on your door today doing that meet, seat and greet. That's something that we as a department have really decided together is really important. Can you make sure that you're there? Because it has a real impact on the start of the lesson, rather than kind of letting that build up or muttering under your breath and saying, oh God, Sarah wasn't at the meet, seat and greet today. Having those conversations, I think, goes such a long way. And I think, again, it does build that trust in your team, because if they know that you're saying it to them and addressing it with them as it happens, they know you're not saying it behind their back. And ultimately, I think that's really, really key and really important. Okay, so text in and talk to me. So I'm going to go to my chat now. So, Natty says, I think you're so positive and eager for positive change. Thanks, Natty. I'm sure I know you and that's why you're being nice to me. Please help me deal with staff who are not on board. Yeah, it's really difficult, that, isn't it? I think my honest advice in this situation, again, not professing I'm someone to give advice, but it's a conversation and we're having a conversation about it. I think one of the things I would always say is that it's proactive and not reactive. So I think as a middle leader, you've got to kind of go into this role planning for how you're going to get everyone on board. And all the things we've talked about so far, leading by example, sharing your why, listening, watching, learning, being vulnerable. I think after all that, you've still got people who are not on board. You've got to really look at who they are as an individual and why. Why are they not on board? Is it that they don't share your vision? Is it that they don't want the same outcomes of you? Or is it that they don't agree with the way that you're doing it? And again, my advice would always be open and honest conversation, not confrontational at all, but just approach that person and say, I've noticed that you're not doing these things, or you're not, you're not being positive and proactive. Why is that? Can we talk about it? Is it something that you think I'm getting wrong? And again, I would always approach situations from that vulnerability point of view, because you can always learn from other people. You don't always have to agree with them, but you can always learn from them. And actually, if that person has got a real thought or a real comment about something that you're getting wrong, then that is what you need to listen to. And again, I say it again, you might not agree with it, but it's certainly feedback that you need to be listening to. Another question on the chat: if you notice that your line leader isn't being vulnerable, how could you support them? And again, I think vulnerability is such a key as a leader. And I think, again, we've got a responsibility really to train, explicitly talk to people about the power of vulnerability. And that can be really difficult if it's your line leader. It's really difficult, like leading up, isn't it? And managing up and having those conversations. But I do think it's an important thing for you to have. Do you know what? I think I'm tripping over my words, because you can't really tell someone to be vulnerable. I certainly don't think you can tell your boss to be more vulnerable. I don't think you can go up to someone and say, hi boss, I think you'd be a better leader if you were, listening more, if you were more open for this. I don't know, maybe you can, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think you can. But I do think vulnerability is a real strength in a leader. And I think often that a lot of the ways to do that is maybe model by example and take opportunities to kind of throw your hands up and say, I'm not an expert in this and I don't know this, and hope that they can see that from that becomes a positive reaction. And maybe that's one that they then choose to model. But thanks, Kelly. I really appreciate that question. I think it's really thought-provoking. And one that I will go and look at, because I don't know the answer. I don't know how you teach your line leader to be vulnerable. That is a great question. If anyone else has got any thoughts for Kelly there, please chat in, text in and talk to me. So how do we manage up? What are tips that we've got for each other with managing up? Okay, I am going to take this moment to go to a quick word from our sponsors and the latest news. Stay with me though, I will be back. We are talking all things leadership. We are talking what advice we would give to middle leaders to support them within education. I've loved talking to you guys. Don't go anywhere.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This week, the BBC reported concerns that the national curriculum does not teach children enough about getting out of difficulty in open water. Gary Gentle, head teacher of Bilston Church of England Primary School, said there should be more emphasis on teaching water safety. While the national curriculum mandates that all schools must provide swimming instruction and that children must be able to swim proficiently over a distance of 25 metres, however, statistics gathered by Active Black Country showed 48% of primary school leavers, that's 7,884 children across the Black Country, were unable to demonstrate safe self-rescue. In another headline, teachers' working hours remain consistently high. The annual Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders research, which is published by the Department for Education, finds that full-time leaders report working 58.2 hours a week, and full-time teachers reported working 52.4 hours a week, which is up from 51.9 the last time the study was conducted. Education Uncovered reported that the largest 2 schools within the Astria Academy Trust have seen the number of students staying on in the sixth form collapsing following the introduction of reduced subject options, strict behaviour regimes and centralised teaching. Long Sands and St Ivo Academies, both in Cambridgeshire, saw the number of students starting in the sixth form falling by a combined 40% from January 2019, in the year the Trust took them over, until January 24. Astria had implemented a number of changes on the basis of students' sixth form choices. While this may be the explanation for fewer students entering the sixth form, it seems clear that sixth form numbers have been on a downward trend since Astria arrived, and the Trust introduced tough new rules on behaviour, uniform and equipment following the arrival of Richard Tutt as Director of Secondary Education. Mr Tutt's leadership has also seen centralised teaching approaches put in place. Sky News reported that most teachers have seen pupils in dirty clothes with unwashed hair and unbrushed teeth in the past year. School staff reported personally washing pupils' uniforms and buying soap toiletries and laundry detergent for families in need. And the majority of teachers have witnessed pupils attending school in dirty clothes. 4 in 5 school staff believe there's been an increase in hygiene poverty, and a third of these said the rise has been significant, according to a poll carried out by Census Wide in September. Almost all news outlets this week covered the fact that teachers in England have voted overwhelmingly to accept the pay rise offer. The NEU Snap poll showed 95% of members voting for the 5.5% pay rise, ending months of industrial action. And as the result was announced, Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson launched the next pay round for 2025 to 2026 with a letter to the School Teachers Review Body asking for their recommendations at the earliest opportunity. In future, we may see the end of the old-style essay written on wobbly tables in exam rooms, since Cambridge International announced digital exams. 6 subjects will have digital exams from 2026. Cambridge International Education said the planned global rollout across full range of Cambridge curricula covering IGCSE, AS and A-Level will begin in 2026. By 2033, Cambridge says 85% of all its high-stakes qualifications will have a digital option. Another possible insight into the future of education, not unrelated to digital exams, comes from The Atlantic magazine, which reports increasing evidence that college students arrive at higher education unable to read books. Students now seem bewildered by the thought of finishing multiple books in a semester, and one lecturer commented, "It's not that they don't want to do reading, it's not that they can't read, it's just that they don't know how to, and high schools have stopped expecting them to." This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope that you can hear me. I am Danny Wally, and this is the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening. We are talking tonight all things leadership, and my question I am asking everybody, so please talk to me, drop me a text, call in, have a chat with me. We're talking about what advice you would give to someone starting out their first role in leadership, middle leadership, senior leadership, whatever, within education. And if you're joining me tonight and you're already a leader, my question to you is, what do you wish that you knew? Now, before the news, we were exploring some of my top tips and also asking some of the questions that you guys have texted in and asked me. So thank you so much for talking to me. We talked about the fact that you don't have to know everything, that there's a real strength in being vulnerable and creating a culture of honesty. We talked about the importance of listening and listening to understand and not to be understood, and using that as a strategy to gain trust. And we talked about leading by example and having that real transparency around what it is that you stand for and what it is that you want from your team. Now, I noticed while the news was on, I was getting a couple of texts. So again, thank you so much for chatting to me tonight. Most of them are questions, so I will go through the questions in a second. But what I will say, guys, is if you're listening to me live, please text in and give me your advice. I love that you guys are asking me questions. It's amazing, but I'm certainly not a guru on this. I will try and answer the questions, obviously, with my own opinion, because that's all I've got. But if you could answer each other's questions or actually give me a little bit of advice myself, I would really appreciate it. So the questions that I've got in the chat at the moment are, how do middle leaders gain credibility? Now, I think that's an amazing question. And I think actually, particularly when you look at it in the context of, I'm kind of saying, don't think that you know everything. Don't act like you know everything. Don't go into every situation trying to prove that you know everything, because it can be so unendearing. I don't even know if that's a word, but I know what I mean. You know, it can really switch people off to joining your team, as it would. So if we're not going to go into every situation kind of proving what you know, how do you gain credibility? And I think if anybody's got any solutions on that, that'd be great. I think for me, I think mine would be just doing what you say you're going to do. So it's not about doing everything. That's very different. But I think for me, it's about, if you say you're going to go and send an email, you do it. If you say you're going to be out on the corridor supporting behaviour, then you're there and you're visible in what you're doing. I think to me, it's more integrity. And I think integrity goes hand in hand with credibility. Because actually, as a leader, you know, I look back at some of the best leaders I've worked for, and they didn't change the world. You know, they weren't fighting fires every day, although I suppose sometimes it felt like it. But they were just really genuine. You know, they were really honest. They were really transparent about what they were doing. And as a result, I found it really easy to get on board with what they were doing. And I think within education, you know, I would like to think certainly that we all share that moral imperative. You know, we're there for the kids. We're there because we want what's best for the kids. We want the best outcomes for the kids. And I think there's an assumption that everybody wants to believe that their leader shares that as well. But again, in leadership, it can be really difficult sometimes to make those decisions that are best for the kids. And I think having that real transparency, even if it's about transparency of thought, you know, I've made this decision, but I've made this decision because I thought about this and I thought about that and I asked advice from this person and this is why I've made that decision, but tell me if I'm wrong. I think that would probably be my best approach to that. But I will say it again, I am not a leadership guru. I am on my first radio talk show tonight. So if anybody else has got any thoughts, please text into the show. I have got another text that says, how would you encourage a middle leader to improve behaviour? Oh, again, like, I honestly think if I was to like rank the first 10 questions that anybody asks they're first starting with middle leadership, I always think it's behaviour, because I think in a way, behaviour is an easy win. I think it's a way of really making it a short-term impact. You know, you look at a lot of the changes that leaders want to make. And again, a lot of it often stems down to curriculum. And although curriculum changes are really meaningful and really worthwhile, to me, they're often part of the long-term plan because, you know, you can't change the curriculum overnight. But I do think you can have an impact on behaviour. And I think one of the things that I would say with that, and again, I absolutely do not profess here to be any sort of behaviour expert. But I think for me, when you're a leader, it's more about presence and support and just having almost like a culture where your staff know that you will support them, but you'll also be honest with them if they've got it wrong. But you're on their team. You know, I look back at certain situations where, you know, parents have rang in and complained about something, and actually the parents potentially not correctly informed by the child, or they've got the wrong end of the stick about what's happened. But the minute any teacher hears so-and-so's mum's coming in, they want to talk to you, or so-and-so's mum's rang in and they're angry about this, it's really intimidating. You know, however long you've worked in a school, that's really nerve-wracking, isn't it? When you've got that moment of, oh my gosh, that parent's annoyed with me. And I think for me, it's moments like that where you need your leader and you need to have that person that you can go to and say, look, so-and-so's mum is coming in to meet with me. This is the situation. This is what I said. Even potentially, you know, this is what I did wrong. But that absolute honesty, and know that that person is going to go into that meeting and they are 100% going to stand by your side. And I think for me, that is imperative with behaviour. You know, you've got to be really clear with your team about what you want from them. And if that's the behaviour policy, you've got to be really clear with them about what that behaviour policy is and what that looks like, and how you want them to demonstrate and follow that policy. But then, yeah, when push comes to shove, you've got to show them that you're there for them. You know, it makes me think Simon Sinek, an absolute guru in leadership. And if anybody is listening to this and thinking, you know, I want to engage with literature about leadership and I don't know where to start, I would absolutely always say start with Simon Sinek. And he talks about leadership almost like evolving or originating from cavemen. And that idea of, even then there was a leader, and that leader was somebody that ultimately people would listen to and they would follow, but they would also expect, if there was danger, that that person would be the first person that would run into the danger, and that person would be the first person that presented themselves to that danger in order to protect other people. And Simon Sinek talks about this idea that if you're a leader, you've got to protect your people. And that really resonated with me, particularly in education, particularly in the culture that we are now. You know, you must have seen all these memes on social media where it's like in the 60s or the 70s, and it's the angry teacher talking to the parent, and then the parent's angry with the child. And now in the millennials, it's like the teacher's talking to the parent, and then the parent's shouting at the teacher saying, "You're not doing enough." And I think, that's something that we're all resonate and we'll all appreciate, really. But I think for me, if you're a leader, you've got to show that you're going to protect those people, and you're going to show, fairness. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination, challenge parents if the parents got a point. 100%, it goes back to what I was saying before about that honest and open feedback. But I think you have got to show your team that you're going to go into the fire for them. If Ofsted phone, you're going to be the last one out that building. You're going to be the one that sat next to your team saying, right, what can I do? Have we got this? What are we teaching? How can I help? Because ultimately that is what you're doing. You can't expect your team to do things that you're not doing. And it's in those moments of weakness, of stress, of vulnerability that we get all day, every day in schools. It's those moments that you've got to show your worth. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. But I would really genuinely welcome the thoughts of everybody else listening to that question. How can a middle leader improve behaviour in a school? What tips have we got for middle leaders? Okay, back to the text before we go on to my top tips, because my top tips are definitely not as interesting as yours. I've got another question here that says, middle leaders are the engine room of any school. Love that quote. How can senior leaders ensure that we retain those staff? Oh, again, amazing question. I think, again, it's only just my opinion. I think for me, especially in a recruitment and a retention crisis, it's the retention we've got to really focus on, partly because it's the only bit that we've got an element of control over. But for me, it's like value. You've got to offer them a reason to stay. You've got to show that you're invested in them as a person and in their career and as a leader. And actually, it's one of the things that I was hoping, if we get a chance, we'll talk about toward the end of the show. But it's like, you've got to ask yourself, what provision are you offering for these leaders? If I was talking to a senior leader and they were telling me about amazing head of department, I'd be like, Ace, what's the career plan for them? What CPD have you offered them? What training have you put them on? How are you making sure that you're supporting their career vision and making sure that they don't leave to go somewhere else when an opportunity comes up? And it's that forward planning, really, that I personally, if I had any sort of say or power in the world of education, that I would actually be saying to senior leaders, what are you doing to support your middle leaders? And it goes back really to what we said at the opening of the show, and we said this idea of what advice would you give middle leaders? And I said that actually I think education is such a rare career path where we appoint middle leaders and we appoint people to their first ever role in leadership with absolutely no experience and often no knowledge or idea about what leadership looks like. And for me, I would be looking at senior leaders in school and I'd be saying, what are you doing to develop your middle leaders? Are you explicitly teaching them through middle leader sessions about team dynamics, how to create a team, how to create a culture of trust, how to, hate that phrase, but how to have difficult conversations. I much prefer radical candor, as I said before, but at least that channel of feedback. And I would be really channeling and challenging, senior leaders and saying, what are you actually doing to make your middle leaders better? There's a big buzz, isn't there, in education at the moment about instructional coaching in terms of making teachers better. And I love instructional coaching. But to me, you've got to coach your middle leaders. You've got to give them a safe place to go and talk through problems and reflect and think. Again, I remember my boss saying to me that when she first became a principal, she went on a course or a principal's forum or whatever busy and important people go to. And one of the things that they said to her was, you're a principal now, you've got to think. And actually, you've got to allow yourself time to think, because it can be really easy in any leadership role, really, to get caught up in the operational things and the meetings you've got to go to and the conversations you've got to have. But actually, when you take on that position of leadership, that strategic overview is your responsibility, and you've got to give yourself that time to think and to plan. So yeah, I think I've gone off on a tangent there, really, but how would you keep middle leaders? You've got to value them, you've got to support them in getting better, you've got to create opportunities for them, not necessarily financial ones, but ones where they can see themselves being challenged. I always talk to my line managers about how keen I am to learn. I'm desperate to learn all the time. I want to learn. I want to learn from people around me. I want feedback. I want to know how I can get better. And I think for me, and again, it's a really personal thing, isn't it? But for me, that's I'm going to stay somewhere I'm learning and somewhere I'm developing and getting better. Okay, so on to the text. I've got, as a principal, I worry for our middle leaders that they're being thrust into middle leadership positions with limited experiences. I feel you, Kelly. I totally agree. And I feel this is due to the market we're currently facing in education. Yeah, totally. And I've got to be really careful that I don't go on some political rampage now about the investment in education, but don't worry, I won't do that. I 100% agree with you, but I think the only solution that I could offer, and again, I don't profess to have the answers, but to me, you can only play the cards you've been dealt. And I think actually in a recruitment crisis where there's nothing you can do about it, it's all the more argument for investing in what you've got. If you're putting adverts out for a head of maths, for example, because I know maths and science and MFL are really poorly affected at the moment. I know there's a real lack of teachers and particularly leaders. If you're putting adverts out for those positions and you're not getting a high caliber of candidate, then to me that is even more reason than you had in the first place to invest in the team you've got, invest in your people. Again, I don't want to sound like I've swallowed an educational dictionary or thesaurus or whatever the right term is, but Simon Sinek says, hire for a lifetime, recruit for a lifetime. You don't just hire someone for what they can give you for the next 3 years. You've got to hire that person and make them part of your team and your vision and your future. And you've got to hire them for a lifetime. And again, you mentioned, Kelly, on your text, you're a principal. That's what I would be saying to principals. You've got to look at your position. You've got to look at the people within your schools day in, day out that are turning up and doing that job for you. And you've got to ask yourself, what are you doing for them? How are you supporting them in their next step? How are you making sure that amazing, English teacher that you've got isn't going to just step out and go for the next head of department job that comes up locally? You've got to ask yourself, what are you doing? You might not have a position to offer them, but it's not about position. I think it's about development. And I think that's where, I don't want to sound preachy now, I'll get off my soapbox, but we've got to change that way of thinking. We're talking about people, we're talking about kids, we're talking about education. And I think I'm such a big believer in people getting better. I'm obviously new to this. This is my first ever radio show, so thank you so much for being here. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and everybody that's texting in and talking to me. But just a little bit about me. I am a senior leader, and I'm in charge of teaching and learning and curriculum. And I often have conversations with people about teaching and learning where the lines get really blurred between this idea of like accountability within teaching and learning and development. And if I was to choose a side of the fence, I'm always on the side of development. And I think that really feeds into what Kelly's just texted in and said there about this recruitment and retention crisis that we've got nationally. We can't just keep having that attitude that I appreciate is quite outdated now, but that attitude of, you're not very good, I'm just going to get rid of you, I don't want you here, because it's such a nasty residue that, like, the message that sends to other people that that person is no good and you don't want them and you're rejecting them from your team is, really, really detrimental to what you're trying to build. And I think actually we've got to create that situation where we all accept that nobody gets out of bed in the morning and goes to work in education, in my opinion, to do a bad job. Everybody wants to do a great job. And we talked earlier about this moral imperative that people share in education. people are doing it because they want to help children. And I think as leaders, the higher up you go in the chain, the more important it is that you return that moral imperative with an investment in your people, that you want them to get better. You know, teaching is hard. A quote I shared on Inset Day, I should have had it in front of me. I shared it on Inset Day, and it's that idea that there's no other job that is as difficult as teaching a class of kids day in, day out. Apart from like the emergency room and trying to deal with that on the night of a crash. And it resonates as so true with me. But I also think that's so true for leaders. And I think if we don't accept that what everybody's doing is really difficult and support them in that process, we're just isolating them. Yeah, okay, I've gone off on a rant there, but thank you so much everybody for texting in. I've got a couple of texts here talking about reading and books that I would recommend for middle leaders. I obviously haven't read them all, but I do try and read a lot, because I think, again, that's part of the responsibility when you're working in education, that mentality and ethos that you always want to be better. The book that really probably honestly changed my career was David Marquet, The Language of Leadership. And I think that book is just so pivotal to getting you to think and reflect as a leader about when you're pausing. And David Marquet talks about an improved mindset and not a prove mindset. And yeah, I think David Marquet, Language of Leadership, definitely. Simon Sinek, Start With Why, absolute beauty. I was really positively impacted by Kim Scott, Radical Candor, Amy Edmondson, Psychological Safety. But even other ones, you know, like I really like the Research Ed series. Any books like that, really. There's loads of books in leadership. I'm not necessarily advocating for some more than others, but I think the biggest thing I would say in answer to that question about books to read in leadership is just read about leadership. You know, some books will resonate with you more than others, for sure. That's the way of the world. But just pick up a book and read and explore and look at something. I just think that's really key. Yeah, just engage with reading and just know that we just want to get better in everything that we're doing. Okay, we have got 10 minutes of the show. Gosh, where has that gone? I can't believe it. Thank you so much again, guys, for joining me tonight. I really do appreciate it. I am going to quickly switch over to a quick word from our sponsors, and then we will wrap up the show with my final 2 tips, and hopefully you guys will chime in with yours. Again, thank you for joining me. Please text in and talk to me if you're joining me on Podbean, and yeah, I'll be back in a minute.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development program, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers, and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
Okay, welcome back, guys. Thanks again for joining me. I am Danny Wally, and this is the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. And tonight we have been having an amazing conversation, if I don't say so myself, talking all things leadership. And I am asking everyone, what advice would you give to someone starting out in their first middle leadership role? So please drop us a text or even call in if you want to chat to me and let me know. We've had some amazing thoughts so far. We've talked about listening, we've talked about vulnerability, we've talked about behaviour, we've talked about vision, we've talked about transparency. I've got my final 2 tips that I can share with you before we get to the end. If anybody else has got one, then please text in. My 2 final top tips. Okay, so number 4, I've got you can't/shouldn't change everything in one go. Now, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but you need a short-term plan, a medium-term plan, and a long-term plan. And I think actually my kind of underlying advice here is that plan has got to be sequenced. So I remember talking to a middle leader, and I was talking to them about this idea of you can't, so say for example you've taken over a new department and you can see that there's so much that you want to change. You want to change curriculum, you want to change behaviour, you want to change the pedagogical approach. To me, I would always say you can't change, or it would be a waste of your time changing curriculum if you haven't got behaviour right. And I think, again, it's very similar, the conversations with teaching and learning, but to me, as a leader, you've got to plan. What are the changes you want to make, and where do you need to start? What's the biggest impact you can have at the beginning in the short term? And we talked before as well about getting your team on board. And actually, I always think behaviour is a really great win with that, because if you do some of the things that we've talked about earlier on in the show about standing outside, having a presence, supporting your team, going to meetings with them, and supporting them with complaints and things like that. If you can do that, not only are you having an immediate impact with the staff and with the students, but you're kind of setting your mark for you to build on. And then actually, when you start talking to the team then about what curriculum changes that you think should be made and they think should be made, they're going to be more receptive, because you've got that credibility there. You've actually shown that you practice what you preach. So yeah, I think my top one is don't change everything overnight. Behaviour always first makes a massive impact, but also, take people with you. Don't have your plan of what you're going to do and then enforce that on your team. Talk to your team, ask them what do they think should change. If you've got leaders within your team, if you're head of department and you've got a second in department or whatever, involve them. This vision you've got, this change you want, what's their role? And again, I'm a little tip. David Marquet talks about plan for pauses. So it's all great putting in a change in, even a really small change, but it's just as important when you're planning and implementing that change to plan for when you're going to stop and you're going to evaluate the impact of that change. And actually, if it's not going well, planning that pause to kind of stop and evaluate it and then change it, or scrap it if it's not working, is so vital. And it's so important that you're involving the team in that, and you're saying, right, we're going to try this new approach to intervention, for example, but after 6 weeks we're going to stop and we're going to chat about it and we're going to evaluate it, and if it's not working, we're going to change it and we're going to scrap it. And David Marquet calls it planning for those pauses, and I think that's really, really vital. And then, how funny, my last one we've actually talked about, but my last one is protect your team. And we've already really talked about that, that idea of you are their leader and you've hired and recruited for a lifetime, and they're your people and they're your team. And it's not personal. And I know that sounds really weird, but you don't have to like them, I think is what I'm saying. But they are your people and they are your team. I'm trying really hard not to say the word family, because I really hate that. I really hate that when people are like, we're a family. It's like, no, we're not a family. Like, we're a team, and that can be as powerful as a family, but family comes first, and my family are at home. And I'm really trying to not use that, because I think that's also a really important line to have in leadership. I'm a workhorse. I absolutely love my job. I would say my job is even my hobby. I spend a lot of time learning and reading and doing the best I can. But you've got to have that line. And I think that's one of the other things I would say is don't forget who you're doing it for, really. Okay, I've got just enough time to go through some of the last texts that we've got. So again, thanks so much for texting in and talking talking to me tonight, I've got one here that says, how can middle leaders, improve the outcomes for children with SEND? Well, that is a whole nother show. Oh gosh, definitely not a SEND expert. I'm not an expert on anything we've talked about tonight, but I think one of the things I would say is my general advice to leading anything is very similar with SEND as it was earlier in the show about behaviour. I think it's read up on anything you don't know and don't profess to know something that you don't know. Ask other people, engage in literature, look at great practice, evidence-based education. And once you've got a strategy, it's then a change management situation, isn't it? Talk to your team, ask their opinions, ask their thoughts, try new strategies, plan for when you're going to evaluate them. And I think I'm sorry I'm not really giving much more specific advice with SEND, but I do just think that's maybe that's something we can come back to in a later show, because I would love to get my teeth into that. And then I've got here, in reflection on your middle leadership, what would you never do again? Oh God, there are so many. Do you know what? I'm actually not afraid to say I made probably every mistake you can make as a middle leader. And in a way, I'm really glad, because I think it's made me a much more reflective leader. I'm not going to say I'm a better leader. I would hope I am. Certainly, I'd hope the people I work with would say I've got better. But I think it definitely made me more reflective, and it made me more open to feedback, and it made me value people's opinions. And even things like line management, I don't really think I used to value as much, whereas now I think line management done properly can be really effective. But I think if I was to, because I don't evade questions, that's not what I'm about. I think if I was to answer that question, the biggest mistake I ever made was the way I communicated with people. I think because I like blunt communication and I like someone to just tell me as it is, when I was new to leadership, I just assumed that other people would appreciate that way of communicating, and it is so not true. And I think actually the biggest mistake I made was being too bolshy and too kind of upfront and just telling people my opinions on things, rather than thinking whether it was the right time or whether they wanted to hear it, or the position that they were in, or how they might feel or think about something. And I never really pre-planned those conversations. And I think for me as a leader, that was the biggest mistake I made. But equally, I suppose, the biggest learning curve. And I love a learning curve in leadership, because that is what it's about. Okay, I can't actually believe I am saying this, but that hour has whizzed by, and we are now at the end of the show. Guys, it means so much to me that you guys were listening. Thank you so much. I've absolutely loved it. I will be back in 2 weeks. And actually in 2 weeks, I will be joined by the amazing Tom Bennett, and we will be talking all things behaviour. So I'm so excited about that. And hopefully we can build on some of the points that we've talked about tonight about effective behaviour management for leaders and things like that. If you've got any questions, reach out to me on social media. And if you've got anything actually that you want to ask Tom Bennett, then let me know as well, and I can put your questions to Tom. But please join me live, because then again we can use the chat the same way we did tonight, and we can share our thoughts and comments and our questions with Tom. But most importantly for me, guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's meant the world to me, and I will see you in 2 weeks. I have been Danny Wally, and this is the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio, and I will see you in 2 weeks.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.